You just erased the one thing standing between your empire and total collapse. And the worst part? You still don't even know it. The words come out sharp enough to slice the silence. For a second, nobody breathes. 26 pairs of eyes flick back and forth between me and the woman at the front of the glossy, sunlit conference room who just killed my entire year with one single keystroke. Colleen Brewster, Vice President of Operations at Liberty Point Consulting. Impeccably dressed, hair pinned like armor, voice always edged in ice. She's glaring at me as if I'm a glitch in her perfect system. And 5 minutes ago, with a flick of her manicured finger, she annihilated everything I'd worked for like swatting away a fly. 53 pages of notes. Stories, human connections, gone, deleted as if they'd never mattered. But to me, they were the only thing keeping Liberty Point from bleeding out its entire client base. And the look in Colleen's eyes right now tells me one thing. She has no clue she just handed me the sharpest weapon I could ever wield. My name's Madison Drake. I'm 33. And until about 10 minutes ago, I thought I finally had corporate life under control. I joined Liberty Point almost 20 months ago, thinking I'd make a difference in an industry that worships at the altar of pie charts and quarterly forecasts. Liberty Point isn't your average consultancy. Tucked high above the streets of downtown Chicago in the glass and steel Liberty Center, it's a place where the espresso costs $5, the view costs $5 million, and every conversation comes laced with tension over who's up and who's about to get cut loose. Still, I believed there was space for people like me. People who thought business was about relationships, not just numbers. My official title was Client Engagement Strategist, which sounds glamorous until you realize it mostly meant endless check-in calls, client reports, and tracking churn risk in color-coded spreadsheets. At first, I kept my head down, but it didn't take long to see the problem. Client after client leaving without fanfare. Emails so dry they read like legal disclaimers. Phone calls lasting precisely 15 minutes, no more. No less, because that's what the metrics demanded. And behind all those polite conversations, you could almost hear the hollow echo of clients checking out mentally. So I decided to do things differently. When Caleb Nestor, an architect from Philadelphia, let it slip that he'd just gone through a brutal divorce, I remembered, months later, when he told me he was getting back together with his ex-wife. I congratulated him. His voice cracked for a second. Then he signed a contract extension worth $3 million. When Linda Sloane, the CEO of a booming beauty brand in LA, confessed that she'd missed her daughter's birthday because of a last-minute product launch, I made a mental note. 4 weeks later, I sent flowers and a little gift to Linda's daughter at her school. Nothing flashy, just a gentle reminder that someone was paying attention. Days later, Linda renewed her deal and doubled her services. It wasn't charity, it was strategy. But Colleen didn't see it that way. She'd stalk past my cubicle, eyes narrowed, scanning my screen like she was hunting for contraband. Her voice sharp as glass. "Madison, why the hell are your calls taking 50 minutes when the target is 15? Because 15 minutes doesn't build loyalty. Because 15 minutes can't make people feel heard." But Colleen couldn't or wouldn't understand that. All she cared about was the next metric. Number of calls, cost per client, how quickly we could close a conversation and shove it into a resolved column. And the faster we moved on, the faster our clients disappeared. So I kept going my way, even as whispers spread around the office that I was too chatty, too personal, a risk. But every time I thought about caving in, I remembered the way Caleb sounded when he said, "No one's ever remembered that before." I remembered Linda saying softly, "I've never felt so cared for by a business partner." Those voices anchored me, until this morning, when Colleen summoned an emergency all-hands meeting. When she dragged me into the spotlight, when she threw my year-long audit on the big screen for everyone to see, and shredded it piece by piece. when she called my methods unprofessional and emotionally reckless, and finally, when she pressed delete, 53 pages, erased like they'd never existed. Now standing here, my pulse roaring in my ears, I know one thing for certain. Colleen thinks she just buried me for good. She doesn't realize she just detonated the only thing keeping her entire empire from collapsing. It's funny how quickly people label you a rebel, just for refusing to be a robot. When I first arrived at Liberty Point, I was sure I'd learn how to blend in, smile politely, nod through meetings, keep my calls short and my notes shorter. But from day one, something felt off. I'd sit at my desk, headset on, listening to client after client sound, drained. They answered my questions politely enough. Yes, revenue's stable. Yes, the new dashboard's working fine. But there was always this hollow pause afterward, like they were waiting for me to ask something real. One afternoon, I stumbled across a client record for Domino Holdings. A tech firm, big account, coded bright red on our at-risk report. The notes were bare bones. Quarterly check-in complete. No new issues, except there was one sentence buried halfway down. Client mentioned tension in executive team. I stared at that line for a long time, because to me, that wasn't background noise. That was an alarm bell. So I picked up the phone and called Marco Vasquez, Domino's COO. And instead of reading from the script, I said, "Marco, you don't sound like someone who's sleeping much these days. What's going on?" He went silent. For so long, I thought the line had disconnected. Then he sighed, and for the next 40 minutes, he unloaded everything. The infighting, the backstabbing, his fear that half his team was about to get the axe. By the end of that call, he'd agreed to keep Liberty Point on board and asked me to help him design a new analytics package to keep his department from getting gutted. $2 million, saved in one conversation. But when I logged my notes, Colleen swooped in like a hawk. "You spent 46 minutes on one call," she snapped. "Do you realize what that does to your utilization metrics?" I tried to explain. That call probably saved a $2 million account. But her eyes flashed pure contempt. "We don't measure feelings, Madison, we measure efficiency." She spun on her heel and stalked away, heels pounding against the polished floor. I sat there staring after her, my hands shaking, because the more I tried to fit into her world, the more I felt like I was suffocating. I thought maybe that call with Marco was a fluke, but it kept happening. A few weeks later, I was on a check-in with Vortex Media. Routine conversation. Then Linda Sloane, their CFO, blurted out that she'd missed her daughter's birthday because of a product launch crisis. It hit me like a punch, because her voice cracked, just for half a second. So I filed that away in my mental vault. A month later, I sent a bouquet and a card to Linda's daughter at school. Nothing fancy, just happy belated birthday. Zoe from Liberty Point. 2 days later, Linda called me, voice trembling. No one's ever done that for me before. And that same week, she renewed her contract and signed on for 2 additional services. Over $1.6 million. But when Colleen saw the call logs, she went ballistic. She dragged me into a glass-walled meeting room, blinds half drawn like a prison cell. "You are not your client's friend," she hissed, leaning in close enough for me to smell her coffee. "This is not social hour. You are wasting time that should be spent moving to the next call." I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. "Colleen, people don't buy services. They buy trust." Her face twisted like she'd tasted something sour. "Trust doesn't pay the bills. Numbers do." And there it was, the line drawn in permanent marker between us. Colleen believed in numbers over people. And I believed people were the only numbers that mattered. After that, the whispers started. "She's unprofessional. She's too emotional. She's not scalable." Some days I wanted to scream. Because all around me, I watched clients drifting away while the company obsessed over 15-minute calls and faster ticket closure rates. It made me sick, but every time I thought about caving, I heard Marco's voice in my head. Or saw Linda's face when she realized someone actually remembered her daughter's name. and I knew I couldn't go back. I wasn't built for quick calls and polite smiles. I was built to listen. And even if it cost me everything, I wasn't going to stop. By the time I hit my 18th month at Liberty Point, the entire office felt like a pressure cooker. Every conversation was shorter, every hallway glance sharper, and it wasn't just me imagining it. People started avoiding me in the break room, pausing their conversations whenever I walked by, because they'd all picked up the scent of blood in the water, and Colleen Brewster was circling for the kill. At first, I'd tried to compromise. I trimmed my call times. I left out some personal notes from my logs. But the more I stripped away the human parts of my job, the more I felt like I was dying inside. And worse, it didn't even work. Clients started sounding distant again. They gave short, polite answers. Conversations ended with stiff goodbyes. And the numbers reflected it. Churn rates started creeping back up. Revenue projections dipped. That's when Colleen pulled me into her office one Friday afternoon. She closed the door so hard the glass rattled. "I see your average call length dropped by 20% this month," she said, flipping through a printout like it was a rap sheet. I nodded, heart pounding. "Yes, but retention's down." Colleen's eyes narrowed. "That's sales problem. Your job is to process calls faster. You're not here to babysit people's feelings." I stared at her, feeling something twist painfully in my chest. "Colleen, we're not selling widgets. We're selling trust. People stay with us because they feel understood." Her voice turned ice cold. "People stay because of deliverables, not because you remember their kids' birthdays." I left her office shaking so hard I could barely keep my coffee from sloshing over the rim of the cup. That night, I lay awake in my tiny apartment, the city lights flickering outside my window like silent accusations. I kept thinking about Marco, about Linda, about all the clients who'd told me they felt like nobody listened, until me, and I realized I couldn't be the version of myself that Colleen wanted, because that version was just a ghost in a blazer. So Monday morning, I walked into Liberty Point and went right back to my old ways. Long calls, warm follow-ups, remembering birthdays. And guess what? The clients came flooding back. Retention spiked 37%. Revenue climbed. Referrals poured in from clients I'd never even spoken to. But instead of celebrating, Colleen got quieter, more watchful. She started appearing behind my chair out of nowhere, arms folded tight across her chest, scanning my screen like she was searching for contraband. "One afternoon," she hissed under her breath, "I saw you spent 72 minutes on a call yesterday. That's 5 times the target. Do you realize how that screws up our performance dashboards?" I swallowed hard. Caleb was talking about launching into 3 new cities. He wanted advice. He needed someone to listen. Colleen's lips curled into something between a sneer and a smile. "You're not his confidant. Madison, you're his consultant. Stay in your lane." Her words felt like acid, but she didn't stop there. 2 days later, she cornered me by the copier. "Madison, I'm getting complaints." I blinked, heat creeping up my neck. "Complaints from who?" "People say you're crossing boundaries, asking clients about personal matters, making them feel obligated." My jaw dropped. Obligated. They're choosing to open up to me. Colleen leaned closer, her perfume sharp and floral. "This is business, not a therapy session. You're becoming a liability." That word, liability, it echoed in my skull all the way home that night. Because that was how Colleen saw me. Not as a top performer. Not as the reason Liberty Point was suddenly raking in millions more in retention and upsells. But as a problem to be eliminated. Soon, whispers turned into outright gossip. I'd walk past desks and feel conversations die mid-sentence. People wouldn't meet my eyes. Some would half smile like they pitied me. Others looked away entirely, as if proximity might make them next on Colleen's list. Then, one rainy Thursday, Colleen summoned me into her office. She sat there with her laptop open, fingers drumming the desk, looking almost cheerful. "I have a special assignment for you," she said, voice dripping honey. I braced myself. I want a comprehensive audit of every client interaction you've conducted in the last 12 months. Emails, calls, notes, every detail. My stomach dropped. That's hundreds of hours of records. Colleen. She tilted her head, eyes glittering. Then you'd better get started. Unless there's something in there you don't want anyone to see. A chill ran through me. Because right then, I saw it clear as daylight. This wasn't about metrics anymore. This was a setup. She was hunting for ammunition. Some tiny scrap she could twist into evidence that I'd violated client trust, or company policy, or anything that would justify erasing me. I wanted to slam her office door and scream, but instead I nodded. Fine, I'll do it. Because if Colleen wanted a war, I'd give her one. I worked like a machine for 14 straight days. My apartment turned into ground zero for caffeine fumes and stacks of color-coded binders. I barely ate, barely slept, but I finished it. 53 pages. An audit so thorough, it might as well have been a living memoir of every client who'd ever trusted me with their secrets and their business. Each note linked directly to revenue. Every personal detail tied to retention numbers, referrals, new services signed. I printed it out, page by page, hearing the paper tray groan under the weight. And as I flipped through those pages, I felt something solid in my chest. Proof! Cold, hard proof that my way worked. I marched into Liberty Point Monday morning, gripping that thick report like a lifeline. Colleen was waiting by the glass wall of her office. Arms folded, face impassive. "Bring it," she said coolly, nodding toward the conference room. My pulse stuttered. Conference room. But she'd already spun on her heel, her heels clicking like a metronome of doom. When I stepped inside, my breath caught in my throat. The blinds were open, bright sunlight flooding the room. 26 people sat around the glossy table. Analysts, senior partners, directors, and Peter Wainwright, our CEO, stood at the head of the table, looking more tired than I'd ever seen him. Colleen turned to address the room. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. We're here today to review certain methods employed by Madison Drake in our client engagement process." The way she said my name felt like she was spitting out something sour. Peter gave me a small, almost apologetic nod. "Madison, please, take a seat." I sank into the nearest chair, clutching my audit so hard the corners bent under my fingers. Colleen walked over to the huge LED screen mounted on the wall. With one flick of her wrist, my audit appeared on the screen. Line after line of my private notes scrolled past in luminous white text. Marco Vasquez confided he fears layoffs. Helped him design custom analytics to secure his team. Contract extended. 2 mail orders. Linda Sloane missed daughter's birthday. Sent flowers to Zoe. Client renewed contract. Added services. Total 1.6 mates. Each note painted a vivid picture. Not just numbers, but lives. Colleen cleared her throat, her voice taking on that faux reasonable tone I'd come to despise. "This is what Madison has been recording. Highly personal information, sensitive topics, emotional disclosures. All of it cataloged under the guise of client management." I could feel eyes flicking toward me around the table. Colleen kept going. "And while some might believe this personal approach is beneficial, we must ask ourselves, is it professional? Is it scalable? Or is it crossing boundaries that put Liberty Point at legal and ethical risk?" I shot out of my chair so fast it nearly toppled. "It's not crossing boundaries," I cried, voice trembling. "It's building trust. Every note on that screen is linked directly to revenue we'd have lost if I hadn't cared enough to listen." Peter held up a hand. "Let's hear Madison out. Colleen." Colleen's lips pulled into a tight, cold smile. "Fine. Madison, explain why you believe spending 72 minutes on a single client call is a good use of company resources." I squared my shoulders. "Because those 72 minutes kept Caleb Nestor from firing us. Because he's expanding his firm into 3 cities and trusted me to guide him through it. That one call is worth over $3 million in projected revenue." A soft rustle of whispers rippled around the table. Peter leaned forward. Is that in the report? I held it up, voice steadier now. Page 37, fully documented. Peter turned to Colleen. Colleen, these are significant outcomes. Her face twisted, eyes blazing. I don't care what the revenue says. This is a breach of professional conduct. We are not therapists. We are not personal assistants. This is garbage. And before I could blink, she reached for the mouse, dragged the cursor to the corner of the open document, and hovered over a flashing red button. Delete all. My heart stopped. Colleen, don't... But her finger slammed down, and in a blink, the entire document vanished off the screen. A blank gray background stared back at us, as cold and silent as a tombstone. Gasps echoed around the room. Peter stared at Colleen like he'd never seen her before. She straightened her blazer. Voice cool as glass. Meeting adjourned. Effective immediately. We will be standardizing client communications under strict professional protocols. This nonsense is over. She turned and walked out, heels striking the floor like gunshots. I stood there frozen, feeling 26 pairs of eyes pressing into me. Peter cleared his throat, his voice brittle. Madison, we should talk privately. But I couldn't even find words, because all I could hear was the hollow silence of that blank screen. And deep in my gut, I knew Colleen thought she'd finally crushed me. But what she didn't understand was that she'd just opened the door to her own destruction. I stumbled out of that conference room like I'd been punched in the chest. My fingers were still trembling around the edges of my audit printout, the pages now utterly useless, stripped of any digital backup, reduced to mere paper ghosts. Outside, the office hummed with the soft click of keyboards and distant conversations. But for me, the world had gone silent. Colleen's words kept slamming around in my head. This is garbage. I felt like I couldn't get enough air. The blank screen kept replaying in my mind an endless gray void, where my life's work had existed just seconds before. 1 second, there were words, proof, memories, and the next, nothing. I stumbled into a hallway alcove and pressed my back against the cool glass, trying to keep my legs from buckling. For a moment, I wondered if maybe she was right. Maybe I'd been naive to think human connection had a place in business. Maybe caring was weakness. Maybe I'd built my entire career on a lie. But then, flashes of faces pushed back the darkness. Marco's voice, shaky with gratitude, as he realized someone cared enough to save his department. Linda's eyes, shining when she whispered that no business partner had ever remembered her daughter's birthday. Caleb's stunned silence turning into laughter when he heard I'd remembered his reconciliation with his ex-wife. I wiped my eyes roughly, furious at the tears. Because Colleen might have deleted my files, but she couldn't delete those people. She couldn't delete what existed inside their memories and mine. Somewhere down the hallway, I heard Colleen's voice, sharp as a whip, issuing new instructions to the team. My chest tightened until I felt like I might choke. I thought about all those clients who'd shared things they'd never told anyone else. Their hopes, their fears, and how I'd promised I'd protect those connections, that I'd never treat them like transactions. A part of me wanted to run, just pack up my things, slip out the back door, and pretend none of this ever happened. But another part of me, the part that had sat through hundreds of calls listening to trembling voices, refused to surrender. My phone buzzed in my pocket. At first, I ignored it. I didn't have the energy to talk to anyone. But it kept vibrating insistently, like an alarm bell I couldn't shut off. Finally, I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. An unfamiliar number. New York area code? I stared at it for 3 long seconds. Then I exhaled and answered. Hello. A man's voice came through, smooth and calm, like he was speaking directly into the storm raging inside me. Madison Drake. This is Liam Matthews, partner at Newbridge Strategies. I blinked, pressing a palm to my forehead. I'm sorry, who? I know this might sound strange, Liam said, but we've been following what's been happening at Liberty Point, and I think you and I should talk. I almost laughed this short, bitter sound that scraped my throat raw. Now's not exactly my best moment. Liam, he paused, letting silence stretch between us. Then he said quietly, Madison, sometimes your worst moment is just the doorway to your best one. Trust me on that. I leaned my head against the glass, eyes stinging, because in that instant, one truth flared so bright I could barely breathe. Colleen might have erased my files, but she hadn't erased me, and she definitely hadn't erased the fire in me that refused to die. I cleared my throat, voice still shaky. Okay, Liam, I'm listening. And in that single breath, everything started to change. Liam's voice rolled through the phone, smooth as silk, carrying a certainty I hadn't felt in weeks. Madison, you've probably had the worst day of your career. I get that, but I also know you're exactly the person we've been waiting for. I gripped my phone tighter, blinking at the polished hallway floor like it might give me answers. Why me, I asked, my voice brittle. I just watched my entire job get wiped out in front of the whole company. Exactly. Liam said, because what Colleen saw as chaos, I see as proof that you're the future of this industry. I let out a humorless laugh. Right, the future, I'm about 2 seconds from unemployment. But he didn't even hesitate. Madison, we've tracked Liberty Point's retention numbers for months. They shot up the moment you came on board. People talk, clients talk, and they're not talking about Liberty Point's software dashboards. They're talking about the woman who remembered their kids' names and sent flowers after the worst weeks of their lives. I sucked in a shaky breath. Liam, I can't take Liberty Point's data. I'm not stealing clients. And I'm not asking you to, he replied, voice crisp but kind. But think about this. Relationships don't belong to companies. They belong to people. If clients decide they'd rather work with you than with a brand that sees them as account numbers, that's not poaching. That's freedom of choice. Something flared inside me, a spark of anger mixed with hope. But Colleen will say I'm stealing business. Let her try. Liam shot back. Colleen dug this grave herself. She destroyed the human connection that kept her empire standing. Now the fallout is coming. I closed my eyes, pressing my free hand to my chest. Why me? Liam, why now? He chuckled, low and warm. Because you're the rare kind of person who makes people feel like they matter. That's the one thing no AI, no CRM, no corporate protocol can replicate. And because Colleen just handed us a perfect moment to strike, I felt the gears turning in my brain. Slow but unstoppable. What are you offering? I whispered. Senior partner at Newbridge Strategies. Liam said. Full creative control over client engagement. No arbitrary call limits. No stifling rules. Total comp starting at $550,000 a year. Plus equity stake. My breath caught. $550,000, more than twice what Liberty Point paid me. And equity, ownership, freedom. But the numbers weren't the real hook. It was the promise that I could be myself without getting crucified for it. I cleared my throat. And you're sure about this? You don't even know me. Oh, we know you, Liam said, his voice softening. We've watched you save multi-million-dollar accounts with nothing but empathy and a phone call. We've heard stories about how you remember details nobody else does. And frankly, we think you're the secret weapon this industry needs. I pressed my fingers to my temple, 1,000 thoughts firing like sparks. You really believe clients will follow me? Madison, he said gently. They already have 1 foot out the door. They just need to know where to go. A stunned silence stretched between us. Somewhere down the hallway, I could still hear Colleen's clipped voice barking orders. And for the first time all day, I didn't feel powerless. I felt dangerous. I lifted my chin. All right, Liam, let's talk. He laughed, light and confident. That's what I was hoping you'd say. And, Madison, just so you know, Colleen thinks she's won. She's about to find out how wrong she is. When I hung up, the corridor seemed brighter somehow. The weight pressing on my chest loosened, and the thought took shape in my mind, sharper than any blade. Colleen might have destroyed my files, but she'd just handed me the perfect weapon to bring her empire crashing down. The next morning, I pushed open Liberty Point's glass doors like I owned the place. My badge still worked, for now. The whole floor buzzed with nervous energy as I walked through, my heels striking the tile like warning shots. People turned to stare. Some looked worried, others looked curious. I caught Colleen near the coffee bar, deep in hushed conversation with Peter Wainwright, our CEO. Her face tightened the moment she saw me. Peter straightened, like he was bracing for impact. I didn't even slow down. "Peter, we need a moment now." Colleen opened her mouth to cut me off, but I held up my hand. "Save it, Colleen." Peter gave me a weary nod. We slipped into the nearest conference room, the door hissing shut behind us. I turned to face them, heart pounding but voice steady. "I'm resigning, effective immediately." Peter blinked rapidly, as if he'd misheard me. "Madison, let's not be hasty. We can resolve this." Colleen cut in, her voice sharp as shattered glass. "You can't just walk out. Madison, there are procedures, transition plans, clients." I leaned forward, cutting her off. "My contract allows immediate resignation in cases of hostile work environments. Having my life's work deleted in front of the entire department qualifies." Peter opened his mouth, but I kept going. "I've accepted a position with Newbridge Strategies, senior partner. They actually value building relationships instead of shredding them." Colleen's face blanched so fast it was like watching blood drain from a wound. "You're throwing away your future for some boutique firm nobody's heard of," she hissed. "And what? You think you're going to steal our clients?" I tilted my head, calm as ice. "I don't have to steal anyone. Colleen, people choose who they trust. And thanks to you, our clients have some serious trust issues." Peter rubbed a hand over his face, his voice barely above a whisper. "Madison, please, let's talk privately. Figure this out." But I shook my head. There's nothing left to figure out. I turned for the door, and that's when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. But I already knew what it meant. I answered without hesitation. "Madison, it's Caleb." I felt a burst of heat in my chest. "Caleb, hey!" I heard what went down. "I can't stay with a company that treats people like numbers. Let's talk about moving my business to Newbridge." My eyes flicked up to meet Colleen's stunned stare. I didn't even bother covering the receiver. "Sounds perfect. Caleb, I'll set up a meeting for next week." I ended the call and dropped my phone into my purse like it weighed nothing at all. Colleen was practically sputtering. You can't just..." I cut her off. "I can, and I will." And then I left the room. By the end of my first week at Newbridge, my phone felt like it might catch fire. Linda called 2 days later. "I want to work with people who actually remember who I am," she said. "Let's talk." Then Marco. Then 3 more clients. Each conversation was the same. They wanted out of Liberty Point. Not because I'd recruited them, but because they refused to stay loyal to a company that thought empathy was inefficient. Within the first month, 14 clients either signed new contracts or started negotiations. Over 60% of Liberty Point's annual revenue vaporized, all because Colleen decided caring was a liability. Meanwhile, Liberty Point imploded from the inside. Rumors flew through the industry. Colleen was calling clients herself, trying desperately to convince them to stay. But the damage was done. Nobody wanted to talk to the woman who'd wiped out the one person who actually listened. Layoffs hit Liberty Point like a wrecking ball. Whole teams dissolved overnight. Peter tried to spin it as strategic restructuring, but everyone knew the truth. Colleen's obsession with efficiency had cost the company everything. And me, I just kept picking up the phone. No sales pitch, no begging, just answering calls from people who'd realized they wanted to be more than an account number. One Friday afternoon, Liam poked his head into my new office, grinning. "You know, Madison, we thought you'd be good for business. We didn't realize you'd be the reason we'd double our growth projections in 6 months. I smiled back. I'm not done yet, because revenge wasn't about watching Liberty Point burn. It was about proving that the thing Colleen called weakness was my greatest strength. And now, the entire industry was starting to learn the same lesson. 6 months later, I stood backstage at a TEDx event in Manhattan, the red letters glowing bright against the black curtain. A low murmur of voices filled the packed auditorium, like an ocean waiting to crash. I closed my eyes and took a long breath, feeling the weight of every step that had brought me here. When they called my name, I stepped into the lights and said, "Business isn't built on numbers, it's built on moments." A hush fell over the room. I glanced across rows of faces, strangers leaning forward, hungry for something real. I spent nearly 2 years working for a company that believed 15-minute calls and perfectly timed follow-ups were the secret to keeping clients. They believed loyalty was a metric you could chart on a graph. I paused, letting silence stretch and deepen. And then one day, I watched my entire year's worth of work get deleted in front of 26 of my coworkers. With a single click, a soft gasp rolled through the crowd. I went on, voice steady, but here's the truth. You can delete a file. You can erase a document, but you cannot delete the connections you've made in people's hearts. Applause rippled through the room. I told them about Marco, whose voice had cracked when he realized someone was fighting to keep his team safe. About Linda, who couldn't believe a business partner cared enough to send her daughter flowers. About Caleb, who called me the day after my resignation to say he was moving his entire contract because he trusted me, not a corporate brand. I could see the emotion in people's faces, executives in expensive suits, young professionals scribbling notes, all caught up in the raw simplicity of what I was saying. Clients don't stay because your software loads fast, or because your charts look pretty. They stay because they know they matter. A man in the front row wiped at his eyes. I finished, my voice quiet but firm. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: the so-called soft skills. They're the sharpest tools you'll ever carry. They're what saves deals, builds loyalty, and sometimes they're what saves you. When I stepped off stage, the applause thundered like a summer storm. People lined up to speak to me. A woman in her 20s said, "My boss keeps telling me I'm too emotional. You just made me feel like maybe that's my strength." An older man shook my hand and murmured, "I've spent 30 years hiding who I am. Thank you for reminding me why I started in this business." And in that moment, I realized my story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about hope. Back at Newbridge, life was brighter than I'd ever imagined. We'd doubled our projections. Clients weren't just accounts. They were people who felt heard, valued, remembered. And Liberty Point, the news trickled in slowly. Peter tried to keep things afloat, but the losses were too deep. Whole divisions collapsed. They sold off parts of the business. And Colleen, she was quietly let go, replaced under the polite label of organizational restructuring. Word was she'd been interviewing, but every firm in the city knew her reputation now. No one wanted the executive who'd single-handedly detonated client loyalty. I didn't feel triumph. I felt peace, because I knew I hadn't needed to tear her down. She'd done it to herself, and that was the most powerful revenge of all, letting natural consequences unfold. Some nights, I sit in my office, city lights glowing outside, and think about how close I came to believing Colleen was right. That caring too much was weakness. That efficiency mattered more than humanity. But I know better now, because here's the truth. Your empathy is not a liability. It's your superpower. So if anyone tells you you're too emotional, too invested, too soft, remember this. You might be the reason a client stays, the reason a team survives, the reason a business thrives. And if someone ever tries to delete your worth, let them try. Because the people who really matter, they'll follow you anywhere.